like now, 80 years after the end of the Second World War. It seems to be a very interesting time to be writing when all of the protagonists, bar very few, are now dead. And we can start, I don't know, maybe seeing it in a more clear-eyed way. We've obviously lost some of the kind of eyewitness accounts and the ability to interview people, but at the same time we've gained the ability to look with distance. So I want to come to that, but I want to start with some detail, if we could, on the boat itself. Can I just have a show of hands? Who has seen whose primary knowledge of submarines in the Second World War comes from the book or the film Das Boot? Okay, so I would say that's pretty much out there. That's, I don't know a lot more about that war. I know a little bit more because I have a personal history. My grandfather captured a U-boat in 1941, so I've read around it a bit more. But Das Boot is where most of us are coming from with our mental images when we're approaching Gav's subject. So the first question I wanted to ask was the difference between a German U-boat, either a Type 7, which was about the same size as Triumph as far as I can make out, maybe a little smaller. But I want you to tell us a little bit about the difference in layout and design of these submarines, and also doctrine. Why do we know so little about Royal Navy boats?
Well, if we begin with size, I suppose Triumph was quite a bit bigger than the average U-boat. So there's just more space for habitability. So where Triumph had actual messes, very small messes, cubbyholes, it had a mess for the sailors, an actual space in which to live, and a mess for the stokers, and a mess for the senior rates, the NCOs, and another mess for the artificers, who were the NCO engineers, and another mess for the wardroom. And each one was a little snug burrow of a home with wood and leather seating and wooden fittings. And I have some photographs to show you if you'd like to see them later. Really quite a comfortable, cosy home. The U-boats were very much, they didn't have these messes. The sailors lived among the torpedoes, the stokers lived among the engines, the officers cramped in the middle, and they were much sweatier, scruffier, more metallic. There was no concession to peacetime habitability, I suppose because the German Navy didn't really have U-boats in peacetime. They built them just quite close to the war in secret, and they just wanted to be utility. Let's get these things so we can get them to sea where they can sink British shipping. The Royal Navy, of course, had to say, well, we have to have peacetime sailors, so if we treat them like shit, they won't stay. We need to make them feel loved and wanted and comfortable. And also, a comfy sailor is a happy sailor, and a happy sailor is an efficient sailor. If you're knackered, you don't do your job very well. And if you think your Navy hates you, you don't do it very well either, because you have a smouldering resentment. So the Navy, the Royal Navy, is a very much what was it, in the 30s, and even in my days, a nurturing organisation. So that's the first difference. Second difference is that a U-boat patrol, the war was quite different. So a U-boat would sail out to the Atlantic for 2 weeks, just to get to its target area, always on the surface, 99% of its life on the surface. And an attack would be 5 U-boats attacking 50 merchant ships with 5 escorts. So picture almost as many merchant ships as seats in this theatre. You're all the merchant ships. And there's 5 people wandering around, slowly around the outside, and there's 5 hunters coming in at night on the surface to kill you with no aircraft. That's one kind of war. In the Mediterranean, a single submarine, Triumph, would attack a convoy of 1 ship, possibly 2, very occasionally 3, guarded by 5 escorts with aircraft overhead, in a sea which is like this, like glass. So you can see down 80 feet and you attack at 30 feet depth. Imagine a periscope coming through here, you can see it straight away. If you get overflown by an aircraft, they can see you right down to 80 feet deep. So completely different kind of war in terms of the tactical risk. And for the first 2 years of the U-boat war, we sank almost no U-boats at all, because couldn't find them. And the third element is that the Navy is a very polite, and even today, warm, polite, and supportive culture. And submarines particularly so. In submarining, often the ratings, the troops would address their officers by first name. Not formally, but informally, just living in the boat. That would never happen in the surface fleet. You would never use an officer's first name. Even today, you wouldn't use an officer's first name unless you were ashore playing football or something. So the Navy was a very supportive, warm organisation. And Das Boot, you'll remember, which is pretty accurate, a lot of shouting, a lot of hierarchical bullshit, a lot of hazing, a lot of really being quite unpleasant, and quite, if I may say the word, Germanic.
You may not.
Teutonic then, Teutonic. And what comes out of the memoirs, and there are lots of submarine memoirs, and the letters, is how happy all those boys were in their submarine. And what a happy life they had. They knew that they were probably going to die, and they accepted that and said, fine, at least we'll die quickly, we won't die in pain, we'll go fast, we'll go together, there'll be no lying on a battlefield with my guts spilling out while everybody else runs off past me. It'll be, and that they won't burn to death like an aircraft, it'll just be kabang. Until that happens, we're going to have a fantastic time.
I think that's a great answer, and I see a big difference between what I've seen with that German film.
And might add, actually, that by the end of the U-boat war, the mortality rate for U-boats was not 10% per patrol, it was more like 40 or 50% per patrol. It was pretty much a suicide mission.
One of your other statistics was that the German Navy and the Royal Navy had one thing in common, which was the threat of the RAF, which is, I think you said, of all Royal Navy submarines sunk from the air, 1/3 was sunk by the RAF.
Yes.
So there was no relaxing as you came into port, because it's not easy to tell the difference.
Actually, the reverse is true. The memoirs repeatedly, and Triumph's history, repeatedly mention how worried submariners were about being sunk by the RAF. And most dangerous, of course, when you're coming home, because that's where the RAF are patrolling. And they were more worried about any aircraft they saw they would dive. They wouldn't bother to wait around to see if it was a friendly or not. There's one story, not a Triumph, of a chap who was sailing out on patrol from the base in Haifa. On the surface at night, the captain was in his bunk, dozing. Something made him go up to the bridge. He went up to the bridge, and as he reached the bridge, they were attacked by the RAF. Nearly sunk, narrow miss, they limped back home, almost sinking. And they got back. He was just after he'd left Haifa, so he arrived back at Haifa to find the air crew who had sunk him celebrating his death in the mess. He doesn't relate what happened next. I think possibly some violence was inflicted.
I would like to hope so. You mentioned there that there's a slightly more roomy layout to a submarine, a T-class like Triumph. And Triumph's layout was further modified because it hit a mine early in the war and had its two of its external bow tubes removed from what is effectively the deck. And that allowed, so much of war seems contingent, so its role was adjusted because it had this extra space, and it could now take an extra weapon, it is a weapon, called a foal boat. Could you tell us a little bit about the foal boats?
Yes, so foal boat was effectively a little folding kayak, invented ironically by an Austrian, I think. And the beauty of this folding kayak was you could pass it through the hatch on a submarine. There's a big hatch at the front where you load torpedoes, which is like this wide. And you could pass these canoes through the hatch, and then people could paddle ashore to carry agents or explosives, and paddle back to the submarine, and then strike the foal boat back down into the hull. Whereas a rubber boat You have to bring it up, you have to blow it up on the casing. It's very hard to paddle, it's very apt to be drifting along, it's very easy to puncture. So rubber dinghies were a pain in the neck, but the Felboat is rigid and small and flexible and fast. You can paddle it at 3 or 4 miles an hour if you're fit. And Triumph was a pioneer in using Felboats to land and pick up agents and saboteurs from the deck, from this roomy foredeck. But you just have more space. So it's striking that Triumph has bunks. The men have proper bunks to sleep in. Whereas in a U-boat, you get a hammock, which is a lot less roomy, and your hammock is next to your mate's hammock, which is next to your mate's hammock. So just that space makes you happier, more efficient, more able to put up with the stress of basically living in a permanent threat of immediate death.
I mean, Gav, you say that they're more roomy, but you can go to YouTube once you've finished here and see a film called Morning Departure, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is a film shot in a T-class submarine, and roomy is not only a submariner can
It's a
call
relative
a
term.
boat like that.
It's a
roomy.
relative term.
But thinking of the contents of the full boats as well, some of the most engaging characters that you go into depth on are both escapees from the Battle of Crete, who have ended up on mainland Greece in Italian captivity or German captivity, who then escaped and made their way by boat, and also the Greeks that helped them. And there's one that, I'll get his name hopelessly wrong, that comes to mind because you were suggesting that he might be the basis for some of the James Bond sort of dodgy Greek kind of heroes, but fallen heroes usually with a great deal of romance. And this one is called Harry Grammaticus, I think.
Grammaticakis.
Okay, I knew
We'll
I'd
just call him
misheard
Harry.
something there. Can you tell us a little bit more about Harry?
Well, Harry is, if you like, the antagonist. There isn't really quite one antagonist in the story, but there is an antagonist to be Harry. So he's a Greek smuggler and probably pirate. Film star. I'll go back to the photograph of him, just so you can, if you like. Where is the? No, this is the. Sorry. So Harry is him, this chap here. Butter wouldn't melt, so looking at him. And he's a very quixotic character. So he's clearly immensely brave, cold-blooded courage by the bucket load. The Greek character is a combination of mad courage, mad conflict and anger, romantic involvement with not just women, but other Greeks and friends and the country and the ethos. They're a very quixotic, mercurial mix. George is laughing because George and Amanda down here. George is one of the crew's nephews. Live in Greece, and have done for 30 years. So they know Greeks very well. If they're your friend, they're your friend for life. If they're your enemy, they're your enemy for life. And you go from friend to enemy and back in about 30 seconds if you do or say the wrong thing. So Harry is this quixotic character who was working on the right side for the right reasons to undermine the Axis, but also running a very complicated love life with not one, not two, but actually three inamoratas, 2 in the same time, which made life a bit difficult. Arranging his war to suit his love life as best he could, and at the same time being suicidally brave in helping escapists escape and Triumph come and pick them up. And he is the story on which, the axle on which part of the story turns. And he's also, sadly, the prime reason that the Triumph turned to tragedy, because his choices led to death, capture, shooting, disaster. And he is probably the single most interesting character in the book. And none of it's invented, by the way. I didn't have to big Harry up in the slightest. In fact, I probably bigged him down a little bit, because a lot of his story is recorded in Greek, and my Greek is a bit rusty, so I haven't been able to dig into Greek archival resources as much as I would like to.
Well, he was a wonderfully unreliable witness as well, and you have accounts of
Completely
where
dishonest, yes.
Royal Navy personnel are telling how he actually is, and then if there's no other witness, his accounts of his heroic actions, which they don't gel necessarily that well together. So
what was wonderful about researching this story, when I first began, there was one book, The Official History of the Submarine War, that had one line referring to Triumph, and that was the only source on Triumph. By the end of 15 years, I have an entire office full of original sources. They just appeared from left, right, centre, everywhere. It's a remarkable and fascinating process. And there are, many of those are personal narratives of what happened on Antiparos, this island in the middle of the Aegean, with Harry and against Harry, including Harry's narrative, recorded by SOE in Cairo before he disappeared off to West Africa to look after his father-in-law, I think. Which father-in-law? This doesn't relate. And yes, the accounts all conflict, partly because memory conflicts, but in Harry's case, because the real account is too embarrassing for him to put down, so he has to massage it towards a more Harry-friendly version.
well, that adds interest to it. And one of the things you were saying that you're most proud of is going back to primary source. And I don't want to throw shade on Max Hastings, although he's a big enough character that he can have a bit of shade from the likes of us.
Pretty big umbrella to throw shade on that.
But he's, even with a large team of researchers, he is quite a long, maybe it's unfair to say he's a long way from the source, but there's no doubt that you are right in amongst the source and the process that you went through in order to write your story is one of the great treats of reading small histories, is that they are very personal and very unique as well, if I may say it.
When I started writing this, I was no historian at all. I was merely curious, and I had no idea of what depth of sources there was going to be. But I am a huge enthusiast for jigsaw puzzles. And what I found, to my joy, was that it was like doing a giant jigsaw puzzle. A jigsaw puzzle with no picture on the box, an unknown number of pieces. The pieces were scattered from here to New Zealand to Canada, to Greece, to the archives at Kew, to South Africa, to Skiathos. I didn't know how many pieces there were, and half of them were turned the wrong way up when they arrived. And it was a wonderful learning process of just assembling these pieces together, and it becomes quite addictive. And jigsaw puzzles are addictive. I don't know if you do jigsaw puzzles, but there's always just one more piece. You think, oh, I'll stop now. Now I need to do one more piece and then I'll stop. Just one more wafer thin mint. And at three in the morning, you're still there going, one more piece. Well, this is very similar. I mean, what I discovered is that history is enormous fun. And the dopamine effect of finding another piece, going, oh my God, that's what that means, and that's what this record refers to. And this signal I hadn't found before in a random box at Kew that wasn't referenced and was in the wrong place was absolutely joyful. And I hope that comes through in the book, because everything in it is those jigsaw pieces. There is nothing invented. And when if you read it, you'll think, God, he must have made some of this up.
No, I think you give some confidence to the reader on that.
Made up.
Yeah, I'd never got a sense of asking, even as a very sceptical man as I am, but is that really true? I think you're so forensic about the way you've gone about it that is great. One of the other things that, so we've gone into how you put the book together. I want to give you, we haven't rehearsed this, but I want to give you an opportunity to show your prose as well, because after all that is part of...
Oh, well, I'm no actor.
And we were told, it's one of the things we were specifically told not to do in our interview tutorial, because they say the truth is no writer can actually read his own prose. But have you got a short bit, and would you be able...
I've got a shortish bit, if you insist.
I literally insist.
Okay, I will comply. Before I play, can I just add one more jigsaw? So this is particularly fun. This lady up here, what is this girl doing up here? So remember John Atkinson standing in the garden in Athens? Well, she was the daughter of the house. a big prosperous tobacco merchant's house in the centre of Athens. And he was there for 2.5 months. He was very young. He was technically engaged to a girl in Yeovilton, but war is a big mixing pot. So it looks as though he and she's called Effie, had something of a relationship. Can't tell exactly how much. Greece, daughters, probably not that much, but maybe more than we know. What I do know is that I didn't know she existed until I came across her in a memoir. And then, out of the blue, her son emailed me in about 2013 saying, I am the daughter of Effie Kulakun, the son of Effie Kulakundis, and I'm interested in your website. And we got chatting. He and I went to the same day school in London, the same age. We didn't know each other at the time. And I said, I'd love to meet your mother. He said, well, I can arrange that. And he gave me the address eventually. And the address was the house at the end of the street I was born in. And she'd lived there since 1960, so I was born in 1960. So for my entire life, this jigsaw puzzle piece was sitting at the end of the street. And what was even better is I went to see her, and she was 93, she's dead now, and we sat in her very nice sitting room drinking tea and talking about Athens. And I said, do you by chance have a photograph of John Atkinson? And she sort of went a bit misty. Yes, I do actually. And she went upstairs, and she was back about 2 minutes later with a photograph of John Atkinson. Now, how long does it take to go upstairs at the age of 93-ish, dig out a photograph and then come back downstairs? Well, most of that 2 minutes. Basically, this photograph is somewhere pretty much at the top of some box of mementos. So that said to me that maybe they had more of a relationship than
a reasonable expectation
than anybody let on. She was at his trial. I need my glasses. Sorry. Just keep those out. This the brilliant process of putting these pieces together. It's been such fun. Are you sure you want me to do this?
I insist. No, quit stalling.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I will read the bit where John Atkinson and his mate Cooper arrive in Athens. If that suits you.
Please.
How shall we begin? So this is John Atkinson escaping from a prison camp in Athens, in Piraeus, in July 1941. Hiding out in Athens port, Piraeus. So with daylight, Atkinson and Cooper could see from a crack in their window shutters the German search party go from house to house on the other side of the road. That night, dressed in spare clothes lent by their hosts, they were taken the few miles to Piraeus to hide out again, and once more to watch the search party widen its net. Their luck held. Their host's house escaped the search, but their hosts were agitated. By the way, if you were caught hiding prisoners, then you were shot. Piraeus was the obvious place to look and was too small to allow them to melt into the background. The only practical answer was to get them to Athens 10 miles up the road. However, the roads to Athens all had roadblocks and vehicles were being searched, but it seemed that the suburban railway was not being watched. Atkinson looked almost like a Greek, but Cooper was a ginger-haired, light-skinned Kiwi. Their host's daughters got to work with mascara and makeup to darken him into the local skin tone, and dressed the men in scruffy cast-off clothing to give them the appearance of casual dock workers. On the morning of 19th July, Atkinson, Cooper and the two daughters of their host, not Effie, different house, bought tickets at the Piraeus station and walked onto the platform. Their blood froze. It was a Saturday. The platform for the Athens train was crowded with 40 German soldiers heading for a day's leave in the bars of Athens. Off-duty, happy, boisterous, with their thoughts on beer and female company, the troops paid no attention to any Greeks on the platform, and the four slipped quietly onto the train in the furthest carriage from the noisy party, just before the automatic doors slammed shut with enough force to remove an unwary finger. The train's interior heated up quickly in the intense July sun. During the half-hour journey, Cooper was heating up too, and his makeup started to dribble down his face into his shirt. Fortunately, the troops were far too happy to pay any attention, and the party reached Athens without incident. It must have felt extremely strange to Atkinson and Cooper. Here they were in civilian clothes, probably for the first time in a year, surrounded by Germans in a strange town whose language they couldn't speak, with street names they couldn't read, in acute danger of being identified. For the two soldiers, identification would probably mean recapture on a train to Germany, but for their two escorts, and probably their families, it might mean a swift trip to a firing squad. The tension must have been almost unbearable, made worse because they were unable to speak either to each other or their escorts for fear of being detected. Reassurance was waiting for them at the platform barrier in Athens' main station. As the crowd of young soldiers powered into the morning sun, from off to one side, a dignified, well-dressed, middle-aged man, out for a morning stroll, looked pointedly in their direction. The man was Gideon Angelopoulos. Born in Soma in western Turkey at the turn of the century as one of the million ethnic Greeks under Ottoman rule, Angelopoulos had been driven out in 1923 in the mass population exchange following the disastrous war in which Greece tried to expand into Turkey. Angelopoulos was more pirate and smuggler than patriot. He'd led a band of guerrillas whose mission was as much brigandage as defeating the Turks. And when the Greeks lost, he sailed a few miles to the island of Mytilene, where he took up as a Greek Robin Hood, working on one hand as a highwayman and smuggler, and on the other as a one-man welfare service for the poor. In 1940, Ian Pyrie, MI6's man in Athens, recruited him into the Apostles, which was a secret agents club. And with a nod to his classical education and Homer's story of a man striving for years to return home to Greece from Troy, had given him the code name Odysseus. Odysseus brought with him his kaiki, which he sailed under another alias, Captain Stavanos. And it was he who had provided the kaiki in which Pyrie and his brand new wife had escaped from Greece in April, rescuing 28 men from the destroyer en route. Odysseus made a discreet signal to follow, and a few minutes later, the little group gathered out of sight in an alley near the station. He spoke fluent, if accented English, and I won't try and do the accent. "Are you all right?" They nodded. "We need to split you up. Many people have escaped from Kokenia prison camp over the past week, and the Bosch are running around like they stumbled on the bee's nest. It'll be some time before we can get you back to Egypt. For now, you must hide." In fact, a total of 37 men had escaped within a day or two of Atkinson, including Jim Craig, who was another of the protagonists of the story. Now that's Jim Craig on the left then, who's New Zealander, who we will soon find hiding in Athens. Cooper was taken to the house of a Dr. Kotsias in an Athenian suburb, where he had an early encounter with the joys of infant childcare. But Dr. Kotsias had dismissed his maid, suspecting that she was a security risk. Atkinson was luckier. Later that day, he and Angelopoulos knocked on the door of a substantial townhouse at 9 Petition Street, just around the corner from the Grand Bretagne Hotel, the headquarters of the German occupation. It was opened by a slightly ageing, diminutive lady dressed in the grey skirt and jacket of a family nanny. To Atkinson's intense surprise, he heard himself addressed in perfect cut-glass English. "Oh, my dear, come along in now quickly. The Germans are all over the place." The large front door closed out the hot midday sun, returning the hallway to its cooler state of elegant gloom. "Please come with me, dear. Mr. Yano is waiting in the drawing room. He's very keen to meet you. There's tea ready as well. I'm afraid we haven't got much lunch. It's hard to find anything in the market at all these days. Captain Stephanos, there's something waiting for you in the kitchen." Atkinson mounted the grand staircase in a daze of confusion. What was an Englishwoman doing living in this grand house in the middle of Athens in the middle of a war? He found out soon enough. His new host invited him to sit on the expansive leather sofa in the large front room on the first floor. Through the open floor-to-ceiling windows, the gentle noise of the Athens street drifted in, obstructed only by the half-closed shutters, designed to keep the summer's heat at bay. Athens was already much quieter than it had been in April. Petrol for private use was unobtainable. Many private cars and trucks had been requisitioned and loaded onto flatbed rail cars to be hauled north for Barbarossa. The business of the city was being conducted on foot, or on bicycles, or on two-wheeled carts hauled by hand. Welcome to my house, Lieutenant Atkinson. I'm honoured on behalf of Greece to host you here. My name is Mr. Ioannou. I'm a tobacco merchant. Was a tobacco merchant, I suppose, since I sold most of my products to English companies. We have a house in London, but sadly we found ourselves here when the Germans came. I'll shortly introduce you to Mrs. Ioannou and my daughter Effie, is that lady there. You've already met Miss Morris. She's our nanny. She's been with us since Effie arrived, which makes it, 15 years, I suppose. How time flies. The Germans tried to take her away. She's English, you know, but I sorted that with the commander of the garrison. She's much too old to go into internment. And of course, she's completely harmless.
Questions, but I'd like to do questions. We haven't rehearsed it very well with sound, but could we have a question up there first? Will you wait for the microphone there?
There's actually a question for both of you, because I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this as well, Rafe. But you kind of alluded at the start to implied publishing battle on the dramatisation of history and then the historical reflection of history in a kind of non-fiction book. What is both of your sense on the relationship between those two different approaches to the truth? You know, do you find that you're learning more from Das Boot about what it felt and, you know, experientially what it was like? And I guess a sub-question then for Gavin is there a slightly different book if there wasn't a publisher, if you could just sort of self-publish with none of the compromises of history? But let's do Ray first, because I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think it is such a good question, and there's a book by a guy called Binet on the subject of Reinhard Heydrich, where he has a big subject on putting words into real people's mouths, and he doesn't like to do that, and has a thing for very, well, is it right to call it dry, but very rigorous kind of presentation. You've gone in your introduction, you've talked how your thinking about using dialogue, for instance, to bring it to life went. So do you want to talk about how
Well, yes. So one of the questions when I sat down to say, let's write this book, was do I novelise it? Whose voice is the voice of the book? Is it seen from the perspective of Triumph or Atkinson or Grammatikakis or Cairo or Athens? There were so many different ways of coming at it. Is it flat history or is it romanticised history? Which one would work better? The publisher, Pen and Sword, published flat history. So they said, we want flat history. They said, do you want it novelised? No. We want flat history, tell the story, and send it to us by January. So I sat down to do that, and then thought, well, actually there are parts where exposition would be longer than just putting words into the mouths of the chaps. And there are parts where the excitement of being in a submarine does not come out if you just describe it. You really need to hear what people are saying and doing. You need to feel you're there on the bridge or on the gun or on the torpedoes. Not all the time, but just occasionally. And there are parts where that process I knew well enough, or we had records, good enough records, to put the accurate words into the mouths of the people in the scene. So I thought, well, that'll bring it to life. It'll just lift this flat history into something more personal. So I put in, like Mrs. Morris, I put those in and then sent it away to the editor and waited for them to take them all out. He gave me a publisher's slap on the wrist. And the editor, bless her, said, no, it's absolutely great, we love it. Just leave it like that. So that's how it is. And I think what it does is, the point of the micro-history is surely it's not going to add anything massive to the picture of the war. This does a little, because the reason that Greece had a civil war in 1944, 1945, 46 was all of the liberal right-wing members of the underground were killed because of Harry. So Harry's actions demolished the whole right-wing part of the Greek underground, leaving the communists a free rein, which you can read about in Captain Corelli's Mandolin, among others. And after the war, the communists were the only game in town. So the consequences of what went on in 1941 for Greece were enormous. But a microhistory is fun. It helps you understand what it feels like to be there.
I would agree with that. Just briefly, what's your view on it?
Yeah, there's, to be honest with the self-assessment, you need to know how much you're being titillated. I think Master and Commander is one of my favourite films, but at the same time, if I wanted to educate someone on the early 19th century and that time and place and the relationships between peoples and the understandings of class and identity and duty, I would probably use that as a source. So I think my mind's still being made up, but I feel like there is definitely power in a strong narrative that's grounded in the drier content that it relies on to sense check, for sure.
I feel that very much.
I would love to have put more in, but I knew it would get kicked out. And I didn't actually just want to invent stuff. Of course, when the Netflix miniseries comes out...
The English Das Boot.
Yeah, the answer to Das Boot. It will have loads and loads and loads of invented dialogue, naturally.
We've got very easily for the microphone man, we've got a question right next door as well.
I'll buy the book anyhow, but what happened in the last 24 hours?
So do we have a show of hands? Do you want a plot spoiler or not?
I'm afraid you've got a mix. I don't think we can do that.
I think to be fair to those who want to read it, I'll tell you one-to-one if you like afterwards. But I don't want to spoil the fun for everybody else.
General at the back.
Thank you. In your research, putting this jigsaw together, how useful were German and Italian sources?
Well, the answer is not terribly, but there were two or three things which were absolutely vital. So we know where Triumph was on her last day because she fired a torpedo, 4 torpedoes in fact, at a target off Cape Sunio, that lovely cape we saw earlier. And we know that only because a reference to it appears in the German High Command War Diary. So these torpedoes missed. And you think of the extraordinary detail gristing obsession that a missed torpedo attack on a small tug in an unimportant theatre of war, Barbarossa was in full swing at the time, appears on the German High Command's daily report. It just gives you an extraordinary idea of the flow of information up and down that command chain. So without that piece of information, Costas wouldn't have known where to look, and Triumph wouldn't have been found, and this story wouldn't exist. Second was, we know where every mine laid by the Italians is, because they wrote a history of their mine warfare campaign, and conveniently in Italian, and provided a map of every minefield they laid. So then you can join up the minefield with Triumph and Cape Sunio. And the third is that after the Italians came out of the war in September 1943, they provided not just the general area of minefields, but an analysis of every minefield they laid by number of mines, separation, lay depth, size and type. And that allowed us to know exactly, pretty much, which mine Triumph hit. So it was wonderful how much detail there is out there about a completely minor, tiny little piece of the war, and all these jigsaw puzzle pieces fall into place. I don't speak Italian or German. I would love to go and do more research, but I probably wouldn't find a great deal. Greek would be a great one, because the Greek archives, I'm sure, contain lots of grammatikakis stuff that I haven't seen yet, that would add even more detail. But you could go on researching forever. You have to draw a line somewhere and say, right, we've got enough to tell the story. Tell the story.
So in answer to your question, Triumph may or may not have hit a mine.
Well, I can tell you this much. She died. You've seen the wreck.
Yeah, we know. Got time for
everybody dies. That's part of the story. But how, I'm afraid I don't want to go into detail.
I'm just wondering if there is a memorial to those sailors anywhere.
Well, there's a general memorial to submariners, always, to every submariner. There's another one on the banks of the Thames. But one of the Triumph's crew members' sons died last year. There were 4 or 5 sons of the crew who lived after the war. He died last year and left enough money to pay for a memorial on that cape. So we're currently working on the design and location of that. So in a couple of years' time, fingers crossed, it really depends on the locals because they have to give us permission to put it somewhere. There will be one.
Are you happy to take one?
Yeah,
very,
absolutely.
very
I
last
don't want to talk to the rest of it.
How much research did you have? How much research did you have to start with about your uncle? And when you were writing the book, what other facts that surprised you?
Well, the answer is none at all. It was just a picture and a set of medals with a little plastic tally on them, going lost somewhere in the Aegean in 1942, and that was it. And submarines are very secret things. So there was no public information about Triumph at all until about 1955, 1960, when the official history of the submarine war, which is the Navy's own internal history, which was a confidential book, was declassified and put into Q. And there's one copy, you can read it in Q, which I read first in 1990, I suppose. Apart from that, absolutely nothing. Oh, and one letter. He wrote letters home, not many. He was not a diligent letter writer. And we have that letter at home, and it's written just before he died, describing his life in submarines, and making the point to his father that he absolutely loved it. It was the most exciting thing he'd ever done, and he'd been in the Battle of the River Plate and won a medal at it. He absolutely loved being in submarines, so that was it. The page, if you think of a jigsaw puzzle, that had two pieces at the start.
Gav Don, congratulations on what you've written. It really is fantastic. And thank you so much for coming. And please buy a copy. He can't say that, but I can.
Thank you very much. Just outside.
Right, that's your job now. Well, it did, didn't it? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, very much.
Well, they say it was very interesting. Thank you very much. They were well.
Thanks, Dad.